Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video we're going to be talking about how to sight read piano music much faster. I'm going to give you some sight reading tips and tricks and talk about exactly how to approach and improve your piano sight reading. So firstly, what is sight reading? If you are on this video then you probably know what sight reading is, but it is important to distinguish between sight reading and learning. In short, sight reading is reading something that you haven't played or seen before. When most people say they want to learn the piano, in my experience this tends to be what they mean. They want to be able to pick up any music and be able to play it on the piano. It is a useful skill to make learning piano pieces quicker, but it is different to learning pieces and songs. Learning something enables you to put a lot of time into it and repeat and put all the detail in, the things that you would otherwise miss. Whereas sight reading is a one-time deal. After that you are essentially learning the piece. So in order to get the most out of sight reading, if you only have one shot every time you play a piece, then it's important to make sure that that one attempt counts. So let's talk about what to actually sight read. Well, the general rule is, in order to improve your sight reading, you need to be pushing yourself so that it's hard, but it's not impossible. So you should be playing something that's slightly easier than something that you might spend a bit of time learning. Having said this, if you are about to start learning a piece, then you should always have a go at sight reading it first. But if you are just practicing sight reading, then you should pick pieces that aren't too long, that are slightly pushing your ability, but you can still do. If you are doing grades, or even if you aren't doing grades, the ABRSM sight reading books are very good for practicing sight reading. I will leave a link to these in the description. These have lots of different exercises in, and if you are sticking to only playing through the pieces once, then by the time you get to the end, you can go back to the beginning because you will have forgotten most of them. And also these pieces tend to be a good measurement for your ability, and it makes it slightly easier in the long run because you'll be able to see yourself improving. Having said this, anything is good to sight read. If you can find any music, then that's great. The way that I improved my sight reading was to have a big pile of books next to the piano, and each time I sat at the piano I would get the next book and start reading through that. By the time I got to the end of that pile, then my sight reading was noticeably better. Okay, so now you know what to sight read or what level you should be sight reading. Let's talk about what you actually need to do with it. So before you start playing anything, you need to prepare, and this can be broken into 5 different steps. There's key signature, time signature, dynamics, performance markings, and hand position. So when you're practicing sight reading, it doesn't really matter how long it takes for you to take note of all these things in your head, because after you do it a lot of times, then you do get quicker. So first of all, key signature. You need to make note of how many sharps or flats there are in the key signature at the beginning of the piece. And you also need to make note of accidentals, if there are any sharps or flats that are scattered throughout the piece. You should try and work out what key this is, and if you can, work out whether it's major or minor, because then if you have practice scales, then you'll have an idea of what sort of geography on the piano you're going to be using. Secondly, time signature. This is very important because rhythm, when it comes to sight reading, is the most important aspect. So you need to know how many beats there are in a bar and what type of beat you're counting. So for example, if the piece is in 4/4, then you're looking at 4 one-beat notes in a bar, so you'll be counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Understanding how time signatures work isn't too difficult, and there's lots of stuff out there online to help you figure that out if you don't understand. Or you're always welcome to leave a comment and I'm happy to help. Thirdly, there is performance markings. So performance markings is anything like staccatos, legatos, slurs, accents, the words that are given to you at the beginning of the piece, for example, andante. All of these kind of features that add character to the piece. These are very important to make note of, just so you have an idea of how you think it should sound. And then we have dynamics. So dynamics are how loud or quiet you're going to play. P is quiet for piano and F is loud for forte. In an exam situation, these are often the first thing that people forget to add, but they're the easiest things to gain yourself those extra marks. And in a non-exam situation, it changes the whole shape of the piece. So it's very important to try and add the dynamics. And lastly, we have hand position. Earlier on in your sight reading career, these will probably stay in the same hand position. So once you've worked out which notes you start on and where your finger is, then you'll tend to stay there. As the sight reading gets harder, your hand position changes and you start moving around the piano a bit more. So you'll need to start assessing what the highest note in the piece is and what the lowest note in the piece is in each hand, and where your hands need to go around those. So now that you are prepared, it's time to actually have a go at the sight reading. So as I've already mentioned, the most important thing to concentrate on is getting the rhythm and pulse secure. In a real life situation, sight reading is mostly used to accompany people, or if you have to stand in for someone else to play piano. And in any of these situations, you haven't got the opportunity to slow down or change the speed. So you have to learn to keep going, and if you make mistakes, find a way of jumping back in where you can. I'd also recommend trying to read vertically. This is actually a big mistake that people make. You tend to focus on the hand that you're strongest with, and you've already read 2 bars of that hand, but then the other hand gets neglected and you'd lose where you are and it trips you up in general. If you start reading vertically, so you read the right hand, the left hand, the right hand, the left hand, and so on, then you'll always be on top of both hands. And this might be difficult to start with because on piano you've got to read 2 different sets of notes, but eventually it will help your general reading and your sight reading. And also, as I've already said, don't repeat any exercise more than once, because after you've played it once, then you will remember things from the first time you played it through and it becomes learning rather than sight reading. If you like what you played and you want to play it again to learn it, then that's absolutely fine, but you've got to acknowledge the fact that it won't be improving your sight reading as much as it did the first time. And once you've played the piece, the most important thing to do out of this whole exercise is to evaluate. You should take a moment just to acknowledge the things that you did well and also the things that need improving. You should write down which areas are weaker, for example, if you got the sharps or flats wrong, or you found jumps more difficult than steps, or if you just missed the dynamics. Then this can become a focus in your next sight reading. And after a while of playing something through and forcing yourself to keep going, and then evaluating and correcting it next time as best you can, you will see a big improvement in your sight reading. If you have been through a sight reading journey, then leave me a comment, or if you need help with your sight reading. And if you found this video useful, then leave me a like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.